All right, welcome everyone. Excited to have you all here today joining us. There is a lot of you still in the waiting room or getting your audio up and running. So we're gonna give you a couple seconds to log on to make sure that you can hear us, see us all good. We have two amazing speakers all ready for you today. And if you are already full and joined, please make sure to send a hello in the chat. Let us know where you are joining us from. Last time, I think our community was across 3 continents joining for one of these sessions. So I'm super excited to hear where you are all based. I'm joining from Prague, Central Europe. Colleen, where are you joining us from today?
I am in Austin, Texas.
Exciting. And Ben, where are we finding you?
I'm in New York.
Amazing. All right. Well, let us all of you know where are you joining us from. Today's conversation is recorded, so in case you have to run early and don't want to miss it, we'll make sure to send you the recording right after. We received over 100 audience questions for this conversation, so do believe us that we won't have moments of silence here. We have a ton of things we want to get through. Like I said, we have 2 amazing speakers, Colleen and Ben, here to answer all your burning questions on how to land your next dream role in community, how to become a community leader, head of community. So I'm sure the conversation will be super insightful, super helpful, interesting, fun. So we're gonna get to it very soon. I'm just gonna do some setups here real quick and we can get started. In the meantime, if you're tuning in, we are posting our current locations where we're joining in from. So make sure to put that in the chat. And if you have any questions for our speakers during our conversation, feel free to post them in the chat as well. Like I said, we did collect questions during the registration, but if there's anything that kind of comes up in mind during the current conversation, just ping us in the chat and we'll make sure to ask our speakers. All right, well, let's dive right in. Again, Ben, Colleen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with our community. Like I said, we are a global community of community pros, mostly in tech, fast scaling companies and startups. And today we're talking about how to land your dream role, how to become a head of community. Colleen, can you give our listeners kind of a quick introduction about you and your work in our industry?
Sure. So I became a community manager in 2008. I was actually hired from the community at Yelp. So I became one of the first remote community managers. My parents were horrified. I was going to be leaving real estate to join an internet company. But it was something I was really passionate about. I loved Yelp. I spent 9 years at Yelp. I joined as employee 40 and left when they had 5,000 employees. And so got to do all kinds of things. Architected the playbook in the US, did expansion work, worked internationally, based out of London. And so just had an amazing ride. I then came out, and this will feed into some of the things that we'll talk about in this call, but kind of had an identity crisis about community. And I was, fairly high level leadership at Yelp and was like, I don't know who I am. Am I a marketing person? Am I a product person? Like, I have no idea. So fumbled around a little bit, ended up working with some more early stage startups, kind of forming community strategies, more early stage than I was at Yelp. And inevitably have found myself after a brief stint in B2B SaaS at Miro with a very beloved product and a great community, joined Reddit 6 months ago as the head of community experience, where I work more on, it's a very big and robust community team and strategy at Reddit. So it was a really incredible opportunity to work on a product where community is the product and the platform is an incredibly important part of people's lives. And so it's been a real joy. I oversee really more of the community marketing function. So go to market, go to community, and lifecycle, as well as localization. And so it's been a wild 6 months. And so that finds us here.
Wow, I can imagine. Sounds amazing. And thank you so much for being here with us. And Ben, over to you. Can you give our listeners a bit of an introduction about you and kind of your experience in our industry?
Yeah, for sure. I actually started off from a kind of different standpoint. I was a founder. I had started a SaaS company and worked on it for a couple of years. Outside of that, I had always kind of been this community builder personally. I had been involved in like on deck early on hosting dinners for people trying to figure out what to do next. I had been a very early product hunt user and helping lots of companies with their product hunt launches and hosting product hunt events. There'd always been kind of like a passion of mine on the side. After I kind of parted ways from the company I started, which is still going on, I ended up consulting for a couple startups for a while, and discovered Notion kind of during that time period, became obsessed with it. I built a website where people could share how they were using Notion, and launched on Product Hunt, and started a Facebook group about Notion, started helping people on Twitter use Notion just out of pure love of the product. And that's how I met the team and ended up joining without really a role in mind, more just like, hey, you love doing this, like, can we do more of this? Can we build more programming around this? So a very kind of organic entry point into joining Notion. And I've been at Notion for the past 4 years. We built out a community team with some amazing people. We have launched a couple of programs to help enable our users to share and teach Notion globally, ranging from our ambassador program to our consultants program and a couple others. So yeah, excited to be here.
Absolutely. That's amazing. We love what you do. Can you do more of that? I feel like that's like the LinkedIn job description of every community role out there right now. Thank you both for sharing that. So today we're going to talk about how you got into the leadership roles that you're a part of. What was your journey there, right? What did you learn? And kind of also looking at what does the day-to-day look like, right? What are your responsibilities? Are you still hands-on? Are you still talking to members? Are you more talking to the leadership, right? Kind of, we're going to uncover all the cards. And I think my first question there would be, Ben, to you. What is your kind of personal experience about, being a leader in our industry? Do you enjoy, kind of being in the community space, being a leader in community in general?
Yeah, I mean, so I started at Notion as a individual contributor, and Notion was always a really small team. When I joined, there were, I think, 10, 15 people, and it stayed very small for a long time. So I was very, very, very hands-on, and always have been. And I consider myself like a builder. I really enjoy creating stuff, building stuff. So I'm very happy. That's kind of been Notion's philosophy. Over time, we did end up hiring full-time employees, contractors, and kind of, realizing we needed to be able to scale our efforts. It wasn't really sustainable forever. So I'm thankful, we've had that opportunity as well.
Absolutely. Colleen, what about you? Tell us about your personal experience, with being a leader in this space with so many people in your team and in your community, right? Because you're kind of always looking both ways.
Yeah. I'm also kind of a natural community builder. It's like something I've enjoyed, pre having a title that had community in it. And I really do enjoy connecting people. And so it was a kind of a natural transition for me. I would say I've had a variety of leadership roles in community that are pretty different. And so, at Yelp, I think I had this really unique and wonderful opportunity to kind of like grow up through the ranks. And so I knew intimately how to do every job that was on my team. So I started as a community manager, and then I became a regional lead, and then I became a VP of, over a bunch of markets. And so never again will I probably get the opportunity where I'm going to do every individual job that sits on my team. And so it was a really great learning experience. But I really had to kind of relearn how to build kind of multifunctional teams as I came out. So the day-to-day on that was very different. I was managing a team at the end while I was at Yelp of 150 people. And so it's a very different job than being on the ground frontline with users. But I did have so much of that experience at Yelp that I felt very tuned into the day-to-day. But more of my work was around impact and metrics and how we're articulating back to the business and doing a lot of that work. As I came out, I went into a seed stage startup at the Mom Project, where I was the first hire really in marketing and kind of brought my community ethos with me. I ended up carving out a role for community and sort of leaned into that work more heavily, but it was really an individual contributor when I joined there, really believed in the mission and was excited about it. It would be hard for me to figure out what my day-to-day looked like during those couple of years, it was like extremely chaotic and we were doing a lot of different things, but I think ultimately like ended up with a really lean team that was able to accomplish quite a bit. And so that was very fun for me. But I would say like day to day now, I find that like I've navigated into a role where I get to do a lot more of what I love. So I still am ahead of, a function of community. I report into the VP of community, which is perfect for me because I love doing the kind of team formation, the work, the building, like being, there are times where I still am in user interviews and I'm very much on the front lines. I'm at the events. I don't love, the executive alignment work as much. And so this role and this level for me has been incredible because I'm doing the building work on top of a platform that's really robust. And so it's been really, really fun. It's kind of the sweet spot for me. And so there's many things I love about careers and community, but one of them is like, it's really not a linear path and that there is a lot of, there's still a lot to be formed within the industry about what the roles are and what they mean. And so I found a good sweet spot right now at Reddit. So I'm going to ride that.
Absolutely. And it sounds like also you have community team all around you, right? You're also you mentioned you're reporting to the VP of community. So you're reporting to one of your own, which I guess, you know, it's easier to kind of have those conversations. So what do you feel like, what hands-on experience prepared you for this role, Colleen, right? What do you feel like now looking back was crucial for you to now, to be able to kind of go into that leadership role?
Sure. I mean, I do think some of the transferable leadership skills, right? Like hiring, recruiting, culture building, setting goals, being able to kind of back out the mission from the vision, like how are you working on that? It has been highly transferable and also allows you to step in and no matter what size the team or the company, really operate at a much higher level. I was very fortunate. Yelp had a very disciplined approach to management, and it was like where I became a manager. And so I like really did benefit from that. And didn't realize that it's not always like that everywhere, that, there isn't this huge focus on it. But to me, particularly in community, which has a pretty significant human element to it, the people on the front lines are the vectors of growth. And so, the community teams, in some ways have this really high level of importance in terms of how we build and encourage and cultivate their careers. And so I think having learned how to do that and focusing on that has been a big part of why I've been able to be successful and step into different types of roles. And then the marketing acumen. I mean, I've sat on marketing teams reporting into the CMO. I've been adjacent to marketing, but like really my career has been more marketing community focused. And that was true also at Yelp. And I think leaning into some of those skills that maybe weren't what I was learning on the job. And so, I went back and did coursework around analytics and some of the things that, were going to be required that maybe I hadn't honed those skills on the job. So that's been really helpful. I think, one of the best pieces of advice is that, and I know it can sound kind of cliche, but like, as we've been building community teams, like, and going back to the earlier piece around, you're not always going to have done every single job on your team, like once you step in at a leadership level. And so being able to deeply understand who is excellent at that and how to bring them into a role where you are not technically or functionally able to guide them means that it is a really different type of hire. And so I've gotten very good at that, of knowing who can be much better than me at things that I am not as well versed in. And I think from a leadership capacity, that's a real unlock because I don't need a bunch of people that are sort of able to take direction from me. And we need people who can like build the strategy and execute in their own way as well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what I hear, because of the types of communities you've been building, your background in marketing and that experience with working with marketing teams kind of helped you, to kind of get started there. And also this huge insight that you just shared of learning, how to hire the right folks who then kind of tell you what should be done, right? Then you can trust them and, you can kind of navigate in to give them the high level strategy and they can kind of execute on it. Sounds like those were kind of the two big things. Ben, what about you? What has been your kind of hands-on experience that now kind of allowed you to move into more of the, leadership head of community role?
Yeah, I mean, I joined Notion at a very early stage, and I think the kind of core competencies that required were kind of like just being very scrappy and creative and, building things from scratch. And, obviously Notion has grown over time and kind of become a bigger company, and kind of learning how to, as new teams have been started at Notion, how to work with them, how to collaborate with them, different ways, different ways to partner with those folks. I think that has become kind of like, a much bigger focus over time versus the early days of just kind of like building and I've always kind of felt like I was one of the people in the Notion community because I really was originally. And versus later on where it's been more about kind of the internal aspect of collaboration and kind of understanding like where we fit in within like a very fast growing organization. And I think that's, at any fast growing startup that's just like something that's required. And especially something for community that can mean like so many different things at different companies, it's like can be particularly challenging. So it takes a lot of effort to really figure out like where it fits in, and how to kind of continue building from there.
Absolutely. And it sounds to me from you and kind of from both of you that you were big fans of the products, right? That you were building a community for. And I feel like that's super important, even if you want to get started, if it's your entry level role, all the way to the leadership, right? Because you still understand the single community member, right? Kind of, if you love the product, what they love about it, what you can do better, what kind of, how you can connect people on those similarities, which I think is also super important. And in my opinion, not that often talked about, right? We always talk about strategy and engagement and metrics, but I think that like first thing is like, if you're applying for a community role, look at the product, like look at the current community, right? Learn a bit more about it. And I love that both of you mentioned this because I feel like it's super important.
Yeah,
so moving. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I wouldn't, even if I weren't at Notion, I would be probably doing the same things. So I think that's a good sign. If you're willing to do the things you're doing for work, personally, for fun and just out of passion, I think that's a really good sign that this is like the kind of job you want to go for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, moving on to kind of like the individual skills, and things we need to learn and have. Ben, what do you think about the soft skills that are necessary for the job? We talked a little bit about past experiences, being hands-on. What do you feel are the soft skills that you as kind of the community leader have to have?
I think something that's been really important for us has been empathy and kindness for the folks who are in our community. I learned this from Camille, who was kind of the first marketing hire at Notion, and truly one of the like kindest and most empathetical people I ever encountered. And she really kind of, I feel like she really defined like the soul of Notion, and I think that like transferred to like the team and the people we brought on, and just how we interacted with our users and different community programs. And that to me was really inspiring. And I think and it's something that we've really tried to kind of continue to build and hold on to. And the people we've brought on to the team are truly like just the kindest and most empathetical people I've ever met. And I think that can be really an outstanding trait, and something that people can really feel over time. And I've seen people like on the internet describe like the Notion community as like the kindest community on the internet, and people just so helpful and passionate and sharing and giving. And that's really hard to to create. But I think it really really stems from like, who are these people, and early on bringing on like the right people to kind of help define that and build out that culture.
Absolutely. And we have Lindsay here in the chat saying that she's right now wearing a sweatshirt with the word empathy on it. So it's an amazing day to match. And now I actually really love this chat. If you are a community builder, let us know in the chat what's like the number one value of your community. Ben mentioned that I feel like we first started talking about skills, but I also feel like it's kind of one of the values of your community in general, right? Empathy and kindness. So let us know in the chat what's kind of the number one value of your community. We'd love to learn. And Coley, on over to you. What do you think are the soft skills that are necessary for the job?
Yeah, I 100% agree on empathy. I think really it's a focus on being extremely committed to the users that you're building alongside. And so I think that takes empathy. I think it also takes commitment to not opting out of execution, because when we opt out of the execution and the day-to-day and the front-facing work, we can lose sight, I think, of the key pain points. What are we really solving together? And so I think ultimately when we're looking at like, how do we remain very committed? And the byproduct of that is that you'll be very visible, right? Like you're visible in the community. You're not just some kind of like figurehead that's like in the executive leadership headshot lineup, but you're like actually felt within the community. And I think that can be true at really any size, and probably more important the smaller the community is, right? But there are, the soft skills being that like community is always going to be a very human-centric strategy that's laid on top of other strategies within a company. And so our ability to amplify the human elements are going to be very important. Of course, there's always the infrastructure and some of the hard skills behind that, like how do you become an operator? But I think community folks in general, like really being able to lean into your ability to connect, and that not underestimating like you personally and your team's ability to connect with the community is very, very important. Like clearly the unlock is when the community is coming together and connecting on their own and like really doing things for each other. And that's where we see a lot of the scale. But ultimately we are the key role models within the community. And so not losing sight of that as a soft skill. I mean, that's true of our teams that we lead, but also the communities we lead. It really can't be understated. It's like we're very visible. And if we commit to that, I think, those are things that have been really strong drivers.
Absolutely. As they say, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think it's very true with community folks as well, right? You're always representing the voice of the community. You're representing the company, the brand, right? So I think listening and empathy is 100% number one. And I love everybody sharing their community values in the chat. Super awesome to read through those as well. So Colleen, walk us through a bit more what your day-to-day looks like. If we were to look at your calendar, if we were to look at your to-do list, what does your day-to-day look like right now?
Calendar's a little scary right now, but I'm very glad to be here for this hour with all of you. My day-to-day is a little bit of a blend. I'm still in the phase where we're doing a lot of development of the strategy of this pillar that we've built that really didn't exist. I mean, it existed in fragments in different parts of Reddit. And so doing some consolidation and sort of understanding like what is our pillar, what is community going to deliver exceptionally well, has required a lot of strategy development and alignment. And so I would say I do a fair amount of that. I'm hiring for a role right now, which is anyone who's done hiring knows that will eat like a huge part of your calendar, but it's something I spend an inordinate amount of time on because it's so important. So I'm doing a lot of that with this one particular role. And then I do a lot of one-on-ones. Like I have a team now that's like kind of coming together for the first time. There's some, we're hiring a leader for one of the teams. So I'm an interim lead on that. So I'm doing a lot of one-on-one conversations. Those can be things I think that are easy to be like, I'm so busy, I can't do these. If there's ever anything not to cut, it's the one-on-one time with the team, particularly as you lead a function or you lead a team. Is a really important. Obviously, it's important that you structure them well, but I do spend a lot of time. I will not cancel those or bump them. If anything, I try to make them longer and spend more time with people. So that's what it looks like now. We're doing a lot of kind of executive alignment around product strategy. And so I am involved and I sit on the leadership with the core experience team at Reddit, which is important. And so I'm sort of embedded in that team as well, which has been good. I can feel like I'm leading like a double life, but my calendar is a little tight right now. I am very grateful to be working for a West Coast company living in Central Time US. So my mornings are like slightly less intense, but that's really the day-to-day. And then like really kind of tightening up our execution reviews on, where's the work and what's happening and how are we prioritizing has been a big push that we've been working on as well.
Absolutely. Sounds like it's a great mix of talking with the executive teams, talking with your team, leading your team strategy, bit of research, right? Kind of putting all the pieces to the puzzle together, which sounds super exciting. Very cool. Amazing. Ben, what about you? What does your day-to-day look like right now? If we were to open your calendar or open your Notion board with your projects that you're currently running, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I would say my number one priority is just supporting our team and making sure that they're unblocked and just being able to jump in wherever I can. So sometimes that means like really getting to the weeds and kind of hopping in to different projects and so do a bunch of that, as well as kind of higher level stuff, defining like a roadmap, strategy for like the next year or the next half, whatever, depending on timing. I also just spend time chatting to folks in our community program. So like, our ambassador program, which is just very active and robust. I'll spend time just chatting with folks, maybe hopping on Zoom sometimes, or just chatting online, making sure that they feel supported, as well as just like internal collaboration, different catching up with different stakeholders on projects that we might be working on together. It could be like our legal team, it could be our marketing team, it could be our customer success team. Really depends on what's going on at that given moment.
Absolutely. Very cool. Sounds, again, supporting the team, always a priority, looking at strategy. So something I've also noticed that's very common, and then leadership team, and then kind of temperature checks on all the different members, all the different communities, programs, etc., to make sure you always know what's going on. All right. I would love to bring one question from our audience, since we had several questions posted already, and I want to make sure that we hear them out. And Joel asked this first question: how do you get a role in community and communicate that you want to own the strategy but not the execution of it, right? So more of a leadership role. This was also kind of following Colleen's point on doing more of what you like versus what you don't enjoy. I'll kind of leave it to both of you to think about, and just let me know if you wanna take the question.
I can start. I think it would be hard in this market coming into a company as a head of community and saying you're not willing to do execution. I think that's going to be a really tough sell. It would be different if you were coming in specifically with a team that already exists, right? Who is already humming around on execution. I see a lot of roles that are first hires as head of community, which can be, I think, very confusing. I actually just spoke to one today who joined 3 months ago, and she was asking me these same questions, like, how do I do both a leadership role where I'm talking to the CEO and be the community intern who's like literally setting up the Slack instance and like messaging people? And it is a lot of context shifting. And so I think really maybe the question is like, how do you seek out the roles where you more of your time will be spent on strategy development? But ultimately, if you're coming in as a full-time head of community, like you are going to be entrusted with execution. So whether that's your team will be executing or you will be executing individually, like we're all going to be, trusted to execute. The only situation I think where this can be maybe a win-win is consultants that are community consultants do come in and form full community strategies with the expectation that somebody else will take that through execution, right? I don't tend to enjoy those engagements because I really do love setting the stage and then kind of understanding what the resource allocation looks like to be able to meet that dream. But some people love community consulting for that very reason. They love to look at sort of like, how do we do all of these things and then hand it off to a team that can execute. I think where I see companies and people kind of joining them get into trouble is when there is a mismatch. So I think if you are looking on a strategy role and you do feel like you've earned, sort of the credibility to build strategy, your ability to articulate, you can build the strategy and then you will lead the team or the resource through execution. But like, we will ultimately always be tasked with execution. So it's going to be, now I get it. You're not wanting to come in and be like a community manager and the head of community. And so I do think those are the right questions in an interview process, because there are a fair amount of jobs that are still out there that look like advertisements for teams of people versus one person. And they're looking for this one, we used to call it the magic wand, where it's like, you can come and you'll do social and comms and community and marketing and and then you're going to get you for this price of one person. And it's like, it just doesn't work. And so I think being very explicit about what your career goals are, what you're like exceptionally well attuned to do, can be helpful as you carve that out. But I have seen very few heads of community, even at very, very high levels, who aren't tasked with some level of execution.
Absolutely. And I feel like Lizzie's question is kind of following up here, where her question was, how do I get out of this individual contributor person, right, into a leadership role? And I think what you said, it comes with building the credibility and then also kind of, seeking out the opportunities to build strategy. I feel like, Ben, your story was kind of very similar, right, where you were the individual contributor, kind of then got you onto the team, and then kind of you continued driving the strategy for the community that grew, right? So that it kind of feels very, very, very on point.
Yeah, I also think it really depends on like the stage of the company. If you're joining an early stage company, 10, 15 people, like, even bigger than that, like you're gonna have to do everything. And that's the nature of like early stage companies. If you're joining a larger, a larger company that's more stable, there's definitely more opportunity, I think, on like the strategic side. So really I think it really depends on which entry point you're going for in terms of stage.
Absolutely. Thank you both for taking kind of the side turn and answering some of the questions we had in the chat. I wanted to make sure that we hear them out before we continue. All right, moving on. I would love to hear, Ben, a bit more from you on what does the cooperation between head of community, community director, VP of community, right? Every company has kind of a different role, a bit of a different naming. Basically, the community leader looks like with the rest of the leadership team, right? Do you sit on meetings? Are you part of the overall company strategy, right? What does that setting look like for you? And what do those relationships look like?
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of, from what I've heard, it's obviously like very different at most companies. So, I can share kind of how it works at Notion, but, I think it's very, a very unique thing per company. So we're on like, a team called, Brand Comms Creative Community. Now none of that existed a couple years ago, so it's all new and has changed over time. Marketing was a part of it, and marketing is its own team now. So as the company has evolved and grown from 10, 15 people to 500 plus people, different kind of structures have taken place. So we're on kind of this Brand Comms Creative Community team, led by someone named Birdie, who came from Facebook, and she is kind of the leader of all these teams, and we kind of work. We collaborate with like the different teams. Brand Comms Creative, meaning we have kind of relationships with like all of the leaders on those teams. I think for me specifically, just kind of given I've been here since really like early on, I had like pre-existing relationships with like the founders, our COO, our GM in EMEA, our GM in Japan. So I think that really set us up in a great place, because I was able to kind of maintain those relationships over time. And when I would get blocked or need certain things, I would just kind of go directly to them and kind of be able to speed things up. So there's definitely an advantage to kind of having those existing relationships. Yeah, and so I think again, really that really unique to like this situation where how I came in. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it sounds like it really depends on also like what's the purpose of the community, right? Whether it is to specifically serve the users, whether it's marketing. I mean, over time, there are many things that, many areas that community can influence as a team. But I think, especially if you're joining more of an early stage company or a company, that just started building their community, there's going to be that one team, and then I think most of the alignment would kind of happen with those other teams that you're directly working with. Colleen, what does that look like for you right now? Which teams are you working with? What do those relationships look like?
Yeah, I've sat all over the place in communities, so I feel like I have many vantage points. My favorite was at Yelp, where we were our own function and we did not attach to any other function. And so in some ways it got to be its own thing, but that's a fairly special setup. I'm surrounded by community people. It's the dream. All of my peers are community leaders. My boss is a community person. Everyone on the team are community people, which is like a dream, but also fairly unique, I think, specifically to a platform like Reddit, who invests heavily in community because it's the product. We do a significant amount of work aligning to comms, social safety, product. So product is our number one. We sit in the product and tech org, which is not uncommon, but specifically at Reddit. So we are all attached to leadership teams across product, and we work extremely closely with them around not just launches, but insights. And we're like really doing a lot of community work to ensure that we can enable the communities to use the features that are coming. So, so I personally have the most overlap with our product owners in the business, and but also marketing. So my team, as I mentioned, is very marketing forward. And so we do have a lot of overlap to the marketing teams. I've sat on a marketing team previously at Miro. I did find that challenging only because when you're stacking up against, particularly at a PLG company, with growth marketing, product marketing, enterprise marketing, community, always like one has a very small piece of that pie, but also will never look the same, right? Like it is not going to look the same. So I always would joke, I was like forgotten child of the marketing family. And I would just be like, I'm just over here doing our things. And I felt like we were doing really great work, but it will feel hard when you're in an execution review with product marketing with 150 people. And you're like, yeah, we're doing it. Like we're getting stuff done. It's so great. It's like hard to feel like that. So it was a big part of my decision to move into back into consumer tech and to go back into Reddit. I will say, like, one of my biggest learnings has been, particularly as you're looking at roles or you're understanding the breakdown in your current role, is the amount of time you will spend justifying the existence of community. And I was finding that I was doing a lot of that, and it was very draining for me, on top of sort of running the strategy, building the execution, running the team. And so it was very important to me as I was evaluating roles, like what percentage of my time would be spent justifying my existence, my team's existence, the community's value. And at Reddit, I do that almost 0%. And it was a very important factor for me because I spent a lot of time doing that, both in my previous two roles. It was something I never had to do at Yelp. And so I got, you grow up in a certain system and you're like, of course it's important. Like, why would none of this would work? Like none of this would be here. And so I do think it's important. I think it's important to establish that early about, like, if I'm coming and here's the resource allocation and here's what we're going to do, I can only spend X% of my time on internal roadshows talking about why community and why it's important. Like the flip side of that being, of course, there's a responsibility for us to articulate why the community is so valuable and what's happening within the community. Notion does an amazing job of this externally also, but like that is our job and that's important, but not on a like, hey, we're going to cut everyone in the budget every 3 months. You have to like come and like basically be on the line for everything, is a very stressful way to work. And it's not something. So I do think that's like an important question. I've asked that in interviews and like have flummoxed recruiters because they're like, well, maybe not at all. And I'm like, well, maybe all, like maybe it's the whole job. Right. And so it's something to consider as you think about your interaction with other organizations and functions and leaders within your company. Is, are you going to be convincing them that your work is important, or are you going to be aligning on, best paths forward?
Absolutely. And I feel like so many questions on how to navigate leadership discussions are secretly asking, how do I defend my role? And I think it's very different when you are proving your goals and like proving your OKRs and doing great work and showing that, versus proving your own existence. I think that's very different. And thank you so much, Colleen, for sharing that. It's really resonating with our audience, and lots of folks are commenting on their experience defending their value and identity as community folks. We had an idea for a group therapy session here by Steph posted as well. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's always, I think it'll be always very tough. So I think that's a good tip when advancing in your career, to ask about it, right? Like what's the stand? How does leadership feel about community? I think that's a super important one.
Right. Can I add something?
Yeah.
I would also add, like, you know, in addition to like leadership, also just the rest of the teams at your company, like educating them on how to get involved and like what the value is of what you're doing. You know, when I joined Notion, that we had one Slack channel, just general, like for our internal Slack. That was it. Everything got posted in there, like engineering, product, marketing, whatever it might be. And it was just a couple people, and so it's so easy to update people and like to see what was going on. And you know, now 500 people later, you have a million Slack channels, a million things going on, right? So it's very different challenge. And like, how do you make sure the rest of the team knows what's happening, how they can be a part of this, you know, milestones, achievements, ways to get involved. And I think that's become like also a big part of you know, of our team's job, you know, just kind of educating people internally and constantly like iterating on our internal comms and processes to improve that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The transparency, keeping everybody updated, right? Keeping everyone cheerleading for the community as well, I think is super important. So absolutely agree. Very cool. I would love to get to our audience questions. Like I said, we got over 100. We're getting more in the chat. There is obviously lots of knowledge to uncover. So let's dive right in. Ben, my first question is going to be for you. What are your must-dos and like stop doings to prove your worth as a senior leader?
What are your must-dos and what was the second one?
Stop doings. So like, what do you have to do and what you should not do as a senior leader?
That's a good question. I think kind of one of my focuses has been around like how to like create a longer term roadmap and kind of look further out, because early on it's so easy to get lost in like the weeds and just always be like you know, just kind of getting through the daily grind of like there's a million things to do, and like how do you actually get to a point where you're looking 6 months out, a year out. I think that's really important. I think that's you know, as the company grows, people, you know, other teams, leadership expects to like see more of that. And so I think really just investing in that and trying to learn from other, you know, other leaders, how they approach that. And you know, I would say that's probably like number one for me. Things not to do. Well, I mean, maybe going back to things to do, I think just really hiring an incredible team. That I think that's also like incredibly important and can help you scale yourself and you know, just bringing on the right people is a total game changer. And I'm really lucky to have to work with like a couple incredible people, Francisco and Emma, who we've brought on in the past year, 2 years, have just been, you know, it's just been a game changer working with them. And as well as kind of we've also worked with contractors, and so those moments of like, oh, I can now free myself up to kind of work on large, you know, big picture things that I didn't have a chance to do before is really big. I might need to think about things not to do a little bit longer. So maybe
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're gonna come back to it. Colleen, a question for you. What are the most challenging parts of your role?
I mean, I touched on a few of them. Like, I think, you know, you have to cycle through some different roles and companies and stages to really find where you're best suited to deliver your best work and find the most joy in it. And that doesn't always look like a straight line, like from the bottom to the top. I would say like, and this goes to the earlier question maybe on like what not to do, and some of the challenges are, it can be really tempting, and community will get asked to do so many things because it's like, well, this is community, right? It's people. I'm like, well, everything is people. So saying no to things can be very challenging because they are often good things that are interesting and serve a segment and could be great, but it doesn't allow you to have the capacity to say yes to the best things for your community and for yourself and for the strategy. So this is like very life advicey, but it's like what you have to say no to the things that are no longer serving or who are just not the best use of time. Like these are things that, feel like, I think I've witnessed this in a couple different places where experiments that went on to never quite be validated, but got kind of barnacled to the strategy. And all of a sudden you're like, why are we doing that? Like, we don't need it. Right. Like, and so you're like, you're shedding and you're decluttering from your strategy, which can be really hard because you're like, oh, that's something I liked, or I built that, or, someone really great built that. And so that can be very challenging because ultimately in any leadership position, whether it's community or otherwise, you're ultimately not going to always make popular decisions, right? Like people are going to not understand fully why you're making decisions that may be unpopular, but ultimately you're trying to serve the best needs of the community and the business and where those needs meet. And that can be very challenging. Like we are community people. We like people to like us. Like we want to be, and often we do get a lot of this, like we're beloved in our communities, and like we end up being the connectors between a lot of dots. But as a leader in a company that is, in most cases for profit, we have to make decisions that can be unpopular with the community, but ultimately need to be made. And, I think there's a way to make those and not, and continue on, but it can be hard. I mean, that can be very hard. And also I think I saw someone here like, oh, you're the community person. I feel like I have now like several attachments of being the community person for communities that I actually no longer work on actively, but I'm like, hey, we know you help moms get jobs. I'm like, I personally like don't do that like as a job anymore, but it's like you are seen as the community person, and that can be a heavy load even as the leader of that group, right? Like it's, I think oftentimes community people are quite empathetic and are empaths by nature because it's a way that we've like leveraged these skills to be successful in our careers. I absolutely have suffered from sort of fatigue of what that feels like in my daily life and at work, and to be like the person who's sort of pepping everyone up and like being the community person. And so that can be challenging, especially since your time is very precious and our capacity is precious. So
100% on both the things. I mean, first prioritization and like saying no to things that you would love to build, especially if you love building and you love folks and you want to invite all the people, right? But you have to prioritize for the greater good. And 100% agree with you on the big challenge, always being the cheerleader, right? For your team in front of leadership and in front of your community. I think that can also be really hard, and would love to talk next time how to kind of keep the mojo, keep the energy high. And I think it's another discussion, but absolutely. And it's resonating with the folks in the chat as well. Ben, my next question is for you, and it's from Erin. Her question is around starting a career as a team of one, as a head of community, and it feels backwards to Erin. Is that true? When you're a single community person, you're the single one person team as a head of community, is it kind of backwards? Are you kind of starting from scratch? Are you hands-on? Are you doing all the things? Was that the same for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't read too much into titles. Like I think if you're the first person working on community at a company, like, inherently you're gonna be in the weeds. Like you're building this from scratch. And I think you're, as the company team grows, like in order to have like the best perspective strategically and be able to build like a long-term vision for this, like you have to be able to like go in the weeds and be a part of it. Because if not, like, it's just very hard to, it's very hard to like understand people's motivations and, and why are you even building this? So I wouldn't say it's backwards. I personally just don't read too much into titles. I think more important is like, in terms of like your long-term goal, where you're trying to go. I think if you're able to build something successful on the community side, like you'll be able to grow a team and kind of evolve from there, and slowly push your way into working on kind of different initiatives, maybe from like a more strategic perspective.
Absolutely, 100%. And Erin is here in the chat, so I'm sure she's happy about us talking about this. All right, moving on to our next question from Elizabeth, and Colleen, this one will be for you. What are the top 3 things you wish you knew on day 1 in your first community leadership role?
Yes. What did I wish I knew on day 1? I think it depends on if you're coming in from the outside and taking over a team, or you've kind of like homegrown yourself into a leader of people that you've worked with, which can be very different. I'll go with the second one, because I think a lot of people are coming into head of community roles where they were not yet part of the team that they're kind of joining. Top 3 things, like your ability to get to a coherent, cohesive strategy quickly around community will serve you very much long term, even if you're anchoring to something that feels like you don't have all the information. There's so much like dreamy, visionary stuff around community, and it's such a buzzword. So like being able to come in and like anchor to reality is really important. Oftentimes I find leadership teams are like, we need a community, let's hire a head of community, and that's the solution. And it could be the stepping stone to the solution, but ultimately, like, you are going to have to anchor to like resourcing, like what can you do if it's just you, what does the budget look like? What does your tool stack look like all these things. So being able to anchor to that quickly, to set expectations, is really important very quickly. Second is that like it is going to be a very windy road. Even when you anchor to that strategy, it is going to get questioned. Like you are going to have to pivot and kind of move through different phases of what your community looks like. And being flexible and adaptable is like a requirement. So anyone who has like a very rigid way of thinking, I think, struggles in community, because it's so malleable with what humans need. And then third, like, which maybe is the first one, I find where I've been most successful with communities is when I deeply lean into the insight of what they care about doing together. And so you may, be like, I was at Yelp, or Ben was at Notion, where you were like deeply part of that community and we're like, would do it for free. And that's a dream, truly. We're not all going to find that in every role that we take. So like being able to kind of understand deeply the needs that you're serving for people and be able to get to something that feels like the movement you want to be part of. And like that can sometimes be very obvious. When I was working on the Mom Project, it was like a very obvious way to rally people around this problem statement. Then other things are harder, right? If you're looking for like a data platform that's a SaaS tool, that's a harder thing, but it is possible to figure out what people care about doing together and who are going to be your passionate users. It's like getting to that insight quickly and then like really leaning into it. And maybe that attaches to the strategy, but like to me, that feels like a building block you can't move through. Like you can't just bypass that or fast forward. Like you have to get to that quickly, and not assuming that your company knows what that is.
Mm-hmm.
They probably don't, actually. They probably don't. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I love it. All right. We are a little over time, and I apologize. And I know we have so many more questions we wanted to get through, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I want to be mindful of our speakers' time. We always leave a couple minutes at the end so everybody has time to freshen up before their next meeting, before their next call. So my very last quick question that I had as the last question of the day, and Stephanie actually posted the same one in the chat. Where do you get your inspiration? And Ben, I would love to start with you. Where do you get your inspiration for the everyday work that you do?
I'm lucky. I'm one of those lucky people where I'm just super passionate about the community, about the product, and I'm very inspired by like Notion's mission, the people I work with. Very, very fortunate to be in that position. Absolutely.
I love it. Colleen, over to you. Where do you get your inspiration?
I'm also inspired by Notion and Notion's community. I think it's great. My inspiration, I mean, I'm very inspired by the stories that come out of communities, and, Reddit being no exception to that. But I actually try to start every day with kind of combing through and finding some exceptional story that's happened. Usually at Reddit, it's overnight. So like you can find something almost every day because there's so much volume, but like really understanding like the beauty that comes from when people connect to each other, and that our job is to facilitate that, keeps me very motivated to figure out how we can do more of that for people. Um, I've said this on a previous call, but like community really is the connective tissue in a company, but it's really also this connective tissue between people. And it can be this antidote to loneliness. And so even if you're working on a data platform or you end up working on a tool, like ultimately it's people coming together. And that to me is really inspirational. I mean, it can sound very cheesy, but like this makes a difference in people's lives to feel belonging to something. And we get to do that as a job. Like we get to really think about how we make more of that possible for people. And in a time where people are more disconnected than ever, I find that that is a really inspirational point for me and for the teams I work on. So
100%. Getting inspired by the community, kind of getting energy from it, building what you love, working with the amazing members that want to be there, that that it brings them joy, I think is super rewardful, even when things get hard. And we wear multiple hats, which I think we've all been there, probably still are wearing a couple hats ourselves. Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing this. We have amazing blast of comments of thank you messages in the chat. So to our speakers, make sure to check them out. These belong to you. Thank you so much for spending the time with our community today. This was a wonderful conversation. We've all learned so much. I know I have, and I really hope that our community has learned as well. Like we said, we have recorded the conversation. We will do a quick debrief in our Slack group. So if you're not there, send me a message. I'm happy to send you an invitation. And Colleen, Ben, thank you both so much for your time. I know you both have a lot on your plate, both have amazing communities to lead, so we really appreciate you.
thank you so much.
Thanks for
All
having me.
right.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.